So, Archibugi's answer, I'm sure I'm not saying his name right, by the way. Archibugi's answer is roughly the same as David Held's answer you sort of saw at the end there, which is essentially the system we have is not great. We like democracy, so can we do that at sort of the global level? And the phrase that Archibugi uses is cosmopolitan democracy, which sort of forces us to sort of look more closely at some of these ideas and talk about what he means. So we're going to spend a couple slides here looking at what he means by cosmopolitan democracy so we can compare it to the system that we have now. The system we have now is one state, one vote, many times, but a lot of times it's also, one state has more than one vote if it's a powerful state. But when it comes to people, so for example, India, which has a billion some odd people, gets one seat at the UN. Britain, which has far fewer people, gets one seat at the UN. And in fact, Britain, this country that has very few people, has a seat on the Security Council. It's a permanent member. India doesn't. So the question is that what we mean by democracy? Like, would it be a little weird if Rhode Island had the ability to sort of veto things that California didn't in the United States? We'd find that a little, like, that's not what we mean by democracy. So let's look at this. So what both Held and Archibugi are going to argue is democracy must be radically transformed. And Held kind of alludes to this at the beginning of his thing. Like, for example, in the past, there was this what we would now call a very radical shift from direct democracy to representative democracy. So back in ancient Athens, when they said democracy, what they meant was you get a say in everything. Well, if you're a male that owns slaves, that kind of thing. But you get a say in everything. Today, we don't really have that system. Like, nobody really asks me if we go to war with another country. Nobody asks me if we're going to raise taxes. I essentially vote for someone who goes off and makes those decisions for me, representative. But we call that democracy today, even though it's not the democracy of ancient Athens. So we've transformed what the definition of democracy is to this right here. It's not what democracy used to mean, but now it means something different, and we're cool with that. Like, this is a democracy that we think is a good idea. So what he's saying is, maybe it's time that we, again, both Archibugi and Held are saying, maybe it's time that we change what we mean by democracy. So participation and inclusion must be extended inside and outside of states. In other words, democracy is this thing that we talk about inside of a state. Well, maybe it's time to talk about democracy on a broader level. And that will be what we mean when we say democracy. So it's a transformation, a radical transformation of the term democracy in the spirit of what democracy is. And the method that he talks about, Archibugi talks about, is cosmopolitan democracy. He's going to call this a new structure for global governance. So let's talk about what this looks like. First, why do you want to combine these two things together, and what the heck are they? So first he's going to start with, look, democracy's got a big problem. Democracy's great, don't get me wrong, but it's got a big problem. And the big problem that democracy has is, what's the process for determining who to include? Because if you want to say we get to decide who we include in our group for democracy, that begs the question, who was that we you started with? How do you get a we in the first place to determine who we are? And that's the big problem for democracy. It's always the idea of who gets to be a part of the decision-making process. So we say, for example, power to the people. We talk about that all the time. Government for the people, by the people, all that kind of stuff. But then it's that question of who exactly are the people? Are you the people? Are you the people? And so at some point in the past, we made this arbitrary historical decision which said, we're going to draw these lines around these groups, and we're going to say that's a nation, that nation gets a state, and we're going to have these things called nation states. And again, Held mentions this in the TED Talk, where he essentially says, look, it worked. It was pretty good. There were the other solutions weren't that great at the time, and this kind of worked. And we sort of got into teams, and we sort of said, this is my team, and we drew this arbitrary pretend line around us and said, this is my team. And then you're a team over there, we're a team over here, let's not cross paths. All right, that's not a horrible thing. The downside of this is, if there's always going to be a we, there's always going to be sort of protecting that we idea. And so the dark side of democracy is, if you're going to be a part of us, you have to be like us, because we are we. And that's one of the sort of downsides of democracy that we talk about a lot, but we don't always talk about in these terms. There's the exclusion, you can't be a part of us, and the homogenization. If you're going to be a part of us, you have to be like us. And that is maybe not exactly lining up with all the things that we think about as good things about democracy. Democracy provides order, but it does so in a way that isn't always great. Okay, that's a big problem. We figure out ways to fix it, and mostly we just sort of ignore it as a problem, unless you're one of the people that gets sort of left out or gets transformed to come in. That's all right. So that's one big problem. Then we talk about cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism is the idea that all human beings belong in a single community. Under the system we have right now, essentially, your main identity in the world is as a part of a nation state. You are a citizen of, for example, the United States. That's your team. And that's your main identity in the world. Your main identity in the world is not actually that you're a human being. Your main identity in the world is that you are an American citizen. And what cosmopolitanism says is flip that around. It should be that your main identity in the world is that you're a human being, and maybe secondarily, you are a citizen of America. Think about it like in the United States. Like, I live in California. I am a citizen of California. But the honest truth is, California doesn't give me a passport. The United States does. So if we looked at the United States back when it first started, if I lived in Virginia, I would have been a Virginian first and a U.S. citizen second or third or whatever. Fast forward till today, now I'm a U.S. citizen first and a Virginian second. And all cosmopolitanism is saying is, you're still an American citizen. It's just what should be more important is that you're a human being. And what that's going to mean is, for example, if I live in Bangladesh, I'm a Bangladeshi citizen, but I'm also, just like you, a human being. I have the same rights, the same say in what goes on, the same voice as you. That's cosmopolitanism. All human beings belong in a single community that is sort of, again, humanity. So what's cosmopolitanism's big problem? Its big problem is, okay, that's great. Let's say that we're all human beings and we all live in this one big society. How the heck do you make a decision with, 8 billion people? Like, how do you ever come to a decision? I mean, even San Diego has a tough time coming to decisions with its, fewer number of people. If I talk about 8 billion people, how are you ever going to come to a decision? There's a whole bunch of different cultures, a whole bunch of different languages, a whole bunch of different people and concerns, and just the time of trying to find out what 8 billion people want. How do you ever do this? So this is a great idea. This is the big problem. It's a great idea, but how do you ever come to a conclusion, a decision? All human beings belong to a single community based on a shared morality. Now, this becomes part of the problem, is that, all right, it's got to be based on a shared morality. So we have things like human rights. I mean, we got some ideas about what we all kind of share together. Cosmopolitanism is going to say that the most valid practices should be applied after all have been examined. So we look at all the possible choices out there, and there's tons of choices because there's tons of human beings, and we examine them all, and we come to a decision based on a shared morality. Fantastic. Now, here's the deal. Everybody knows our practices are the most valid. Okay? This is where we get into a problem here. Is in order to get some sort of conclusion, we need a shared morality. And with a shared morality, that means that essentially, if you don't agree with us, either we have to start to agree with you or you have to start to agree with us. And what then happens is, like, one of the great things you have in the world right now is all this diversity. Like different cultures, different ideas, different value systems. And cosmopolitanism, I mean, just by its very nature of trying to come to a consensus, is going to say we have to all come to a consensus on this, which means we have to start to agree on the criteria of how we do this, what we care about, blah, blah, blah. And so we're going to have to come up with things that are our practices. And if you don't like them, then are you really human anymore? Does that make sense? Like, you have to sort of, you get assimilated in a way. Cosmopolitanism can quickly lead to assimilation. Which, interestingly enough, the democracy thing was the same thing. The only option, the only thing with democracy is that if you didn't want to be assimilated, there were other options to sort of go somewhere else. But here, like, there isn't that option. So here's, again, just to break it down like this, and this is the very simple thing. Democracy has this problem, big problem. Cosmopolitan has this big problem. And what Archibugi says is if I take cosmopolitanism and I combine them with democracy, I put them together, it's going to mellow both those problems out. They answer each other's big problems. That if you have a democratic process in cosmopolitanism, you don't have to have assimilation, because what you can have is you can have people taking different positions, and I might be in the minority, but I don't have to become like the majority. And if we go back to democracy there, its big problem was what's the process for determining to include? Well, that's easy. Cosmopolitanism says you include everybody, like problem solved. And so what he's essentially saying is it's not like it's going to be a perfect system any more than democracy today is perfect, but cosmopolitan democracy actually solves some of democracy's big problems and solves some of cosmopolitan's big problems. All right, that's a little messy. I think I didn't do it really good justice, but you're going to read the books, and so you're going to get the idea of what he's talking about here. The point being, he's going to say, look, this is a better process. This is a better decision-making global governance process than states sitting around the UN making decisions on behalf of their citizens, whether they are rich, poor, billions, or very few citizens. This is much more representative of humanity rather than representative of this random line drawing that we did a long time ago that said, this is the United States, this is Mexico. All right. You're going to watch another video here, a little Archibugi. He's like a 6-minute video here about him talking a little bit about this.